Hey, Wes Collins, how are you?
Hey John, I'm lovely. We finally
I,
got some rain here in North Carolina, and so all the streets don't look like, the kids just pounded the erasers out there. You know,
nice, nice. Well, hey, I really appreciate you joining me here on Walking Inside Poems. You were a guest on my other podcast. I'm thinking probably I should have looked this up 2 years ago, maybe.
maybe
Something.
more.
Yeah, yeah,
Time
maybe
is
more.
pretty elastic right now. I've been wrong in both directions several times.
Yeah,
You know, about like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. Oh God, 2019 is 6 years ago.
yeah. In fact,
Or
in fact, I think I was thinking about when we first met, and I think you did my live stream during the pandemic.
that's right.
So that had to be, I don't know, 5 years ago.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy. Well, hey, before we get into T.S. Eliot and his poem Preludes, why don't you, for our listeners and viewers, tell everyone who you are and what you're about?
Okay. My name's Wes Collins. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. You're hearing my dog kind of wandering around, looking for a place to settle. Um, I was uh, my day job was librarian until 2022, and then in 2022, I kind of tried to. I'm going pro as a songwriter and musician. Um, and in fits and starts like you do.
Hmm.
Um, that's I guess that's the um, 35,000 mile view, right?
Yeah,
The
but
overview.
you're working as a singer-songwriter now. You're making records. You're touring. I know you've pretty much played coast to coast here in the U.S. Is that right?
Uh, yeah. There's a lot of gaps in the middle, but I have played the West Coast and the East Coast and smack dab in the middle in Kansas and
Huh?
places like that.
Any
And
plans to tour internationally?
the closest that I've come is Justin Farron and I are going to lead one of those Scotland folk tours
Oh, cool,
in 2026.
cool.
That's like a 10-day excursion where you go and you lead, a bus of 20 people or so through Scotland, and then in the middle there you play them a show.
That's great,
So
man. That's great.
yeah,
I for some reason I was thinking Ireland. I was thinking you would go over well in Ireland. So Scotland, I'm sure the same. Well, great, man. Again, thank you for being here. We're going to talk about T.S. Eliot, and you chose his poem Preludes, which we're going to talk a little bit about why, and we're going to get into this poem a little bit. Uh,
hmm
let me start by reading the poem.
all right.
I because I've heard so many recordings of T.S. Eliot, I when I read his poems, I want to read it in that voice. The
Yeah.
winter evening settles down with this. I won't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's in four parts. Preludes. One. The winter evening settles down with smell of steaks in passageways. 6 o'clock. The burnt out ends of smoky days. And now a gusty shower wraps the grimy scraps of withered leaves about your feet and newspapers from vacant lots. The showers beat on broken blinds and chimney-pots, and at the corner of the street a lonely cab horse steams and stamps, and then the lighting of the lamps. 2. The morning comes to consciousness of faint, stale smells of beer from the sawdust-trampled street with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands. With the other masquerades that time resumes, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. 3. You tossed a blanket from the bed. You lay upon your back and waited. You dozed and watched the night revealing the 1,000 sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling, and when all the world came back, and light crept up between the shutters, and you heard the sparrows in the gutters, You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. Sitting along the bed's edge where you curled the papers from your hair or clasped the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. 4. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block, or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, and short square fingers stuffing pipes and evening newspapers, and eyes assured of certain certainties, the conscience of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling. The notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh. The worlds revolve like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots. Not a real happy poem.
Mm.
It's obviously a city poem. It
Mm-hmm.
is. People, if you don't see it as I'm reading it, but it is in irregular uh, forms here. The verses are, there are rhymes, but there's not any particular form that he's following. It is free verse and irregular stanza lengths and line lengths.
Yeah, the rhymes almost feel incidental.
Yeah, I love them though, and there's some really great alliteration. We'll get into that, but I made note of some of the words that conjure sort of this little bit of a woeful feeling here. Burnt out, grimy, withered, broken, stale, muddy, dingy, sordid, yellow feet, soiled hands, trampled, blackened, suffering. Um,
Stubby fingers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So actually, let's back up before we start looking at some of the lines and talking about them, and tell our listeners why you chose Eliot and why you chose this poem.
Well, so you reached out and suggested that I pick out a poem, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so I thought of a couple, and I thought at the time that it would like, oh, I'll think of all these different poems, and then I realized I actually, as much as I really enjoy poetry, I don't consume that much of it. I don't really sit down and like I'll come across it online and I'll read it and I'll enjoy it, but I don't sit down with, a collection of poems often and read them. But if somebody forwards me a poem in an email or whatever, I always read it and really enjoy it, and it kind of lights me up, but it's not something that I seek out. And so I was like, oh yikes, I don't know what I'm gonna pick. So I defaulted to Billy Collins because he's fun,
And he's
you know.
great. Yeah.
Um, but several people had plumped for Billy Collins recently, and so like maybe come up with something else. And so I thought about my wife's favorite um, favorite poet is T.S. Eliot, um, and I'm pretty sure that Preludes was her favorite poem, and I had never read it. So it's like I think it would be uh, a good idea for me to just dive into this poem and see what comes up sticking to my clothes, just to see um, what do I get out of this thing.
And and
Um,
and you're talking about it in the past tense. We should tell people that she did pass away about a year ago. Is that right?
yeah, December 2023.
Yeah.
Um,
I
we,
can't
we
even
lost.
imagine, man. I can't even imagine. My obviously my condolences, but
And
you don't ever get over that. I know, but it probably as the time passes, it I don't know. You tell me. Does it get a little bit easier to deal with?
I think a year and a half on is really not that much time.
Right.
Probably. I mean, what I've given to understand, especially, we were married for 33 years, and I honestly I find that, like, this time last year, my most recent memories were terrible, and now this year, at this point, I'm watching the garden pop up. I'm like, oh, the Anita's bulbs are springing up, and
Yeah.
she would love to see the red buds coming out. And so in some ways um, it's more painful now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and in other ways, at the same time, like, when I say pain, that's not really accurate. It's a bittersweet thing. There is sweet in that bitter. There's, like, um, I'm experiencing all that through her, even though she's not here, and that's painful, but it's also rich.
Yeah.
I don't that I'm not articulating that very
Well,
well, but
that's great, man. And I've lost both my parents, and my dad in 1985, so we're talking 40 years ago.
yeah,
And and yeah, the first year and a half was really really hard because that was the first person really close to me that I lost, and it's your dad. But
yeah,
the funny thing is, even 40 years later, I'll see someone who reminds me of him, or I'll hear a phrase, or I'll go through a box and find something of his, and it's just like I'm right back. I'm right back in
yeah.
1985. It's pretty powerful. Do you
It's like
have you
sense memory, right?
you bet have you written many songs either directly or indirectly about
I
Anita?
have,
Yeah,
yeah, I
I'm
have
sure.
actually. Went through a little bit of a purple patch this time last year, writing, and it was kind of therapeutic. It almost felt inappropriate,
Ah,
you know, but it was kind of like journaling,
hmm,
but to just bring those muscles into trying to articulate what I was going through,
yeah,
or I don't know, just it helped me to feel the feelings, I think,
hmm,
um, without, like, putting my tongue directly on the third rail, just like
yeah,
I can touch this, and then I
yeah,
can come back to it, and I can look at it as a piece of art, or I can look at it as something I need to deal with personally. Um, and
or
in a
both.
couple of cases, yeah, in a couple of cases, I got songs that I think I'm actually going to hold on to.
Nice, nice. Well, that is one thing artists do is we take our pain and we turn it into art. But um,
Mm.
so before we get into this poem, let me ask you one more thing
Mm.
that related. How do you sort of gave us a caveat at the beginning that you're not a poetry expert, and that's you're being too humble, I think, because you're a songwriter. How do
Mm.
how do songs? Do you ever think of yourself as a poet who sings? Do you ever dare think of it that way? Because I've heard your songs, I've read your lyrics. You are a poet.
I'm flattered to hear that. Um, I just think that's the brain I was issued, and
Well, even if you're just thinking about it off the top of your head now, how would you respond if I say, how is a song different than a poem? What comes to mind?
well, I think songs, and I don't know, I think poems can go this way as well. You can be obscure and mathematical and um, very tricky in a poem and in a song. And I think it's a little more true about a song, at least it feels this way to me, that it's also very important to be direct in a song. Uh, to like I have to remind myself to say the thing
Mm.
sometimes. To just like I'll be like looking for a certain uh, clever or you know interesting way to put a situation, and I used that was a way that Anita was very helpful for me, was like I would go and try to tell her what I was trying to say, what I'm trying to get across is, and then like go
There it
grab a
is.
piece of paper and like just say it, just say the thing, don't
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
don't get clever, just
And,
say it. And
and,
I've found myself doing that, in songs, like just like what I'm trying to say. I'm lonely is all, like
yeah.
that's all I'm
Yeah.
just trying to say.
But you can't just say I'm lonely. We have to express that loneliness in a way that's creative and interesting and artistic, and leaves people. It's not so didactic or so direct as to just have a song say I am lonely, I am lonely. I mean, we have to
Yeah,
craft around that to convey it in a way, also to help. One way I think songs can be similar to poems, or the same, is I want, yeah, I want my listener to get it, but I want them to co-create it with me. I want them to have that kind of same, or their own experience. I got to tell you, I've thought about this a lot, and one of the only differences I think that that I can say absolutely this is a difference between a song and a poem
hmm,
is when, and I'd be surprised if you don't agree with this, but tell me if you don't. When I'm writing a song, there is a music to poetry, and I want it to sound a certain way, but now I have a melody, and I've got to fit
yeah,
words, sounds into this melody. And so there's this sort of other burden and also blessing, but I found that meaning kind of comes secondary to the sound of the word as it fits. It's almost like you're fitting pieces in a puzzle. I think of it that the melody at that certain point requires a certain sound
hmm,
for it to work. And I've got to find a sound, a syllable, an utterance of some sort that works in that moment with the melody. You don't have
yeah,
that burden, or like I said, it's both a burden and a blessing. You don't have that with poetry as much. You certainly, you want the poem to have a music, and you want it to be read out loud, and you want it to sound a certain way, but not quite like when you're writing a song. Does all that make sense?
it does. I think there's leeway in in like when you're writing. I think it's very helpful to have, like, when people ask me if the music or the words come first, usually the music comes first by microseconds. Like like I'm dicking around on the guitar
Yeah.
and I come up with a melody, and I'll sing words that are nonsense at first, that hold that melody,
Yeah.
like in
Exactly.
just a Rorschach-y kind of way,
Yeah.
just you know and then eventually that those words will metastasize onto the melody, to where, like, well, I guess that's what this song is
Yeah.
going
Yep.
forward,
Exactly. Exactly. Isn't the cliche or the paradigm example that McCartney writing yesterday? You remember he went around
Yeah,
singing
scrambled eggs.
scrambled eggs, yeah, for days. Yeah. Well, look, let's get into this poem. Let's walk inside this poem a little bit,
All right.
and see what happens here. Um, yeah. So again, it is definitely we're situated in a city. It's very much a city poem. There's a lot of description, but there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of impressionistic kind of vibe as well. The winter evening settles down. There's a lot of kind of personification, like the winter evening settles down as if it's a person settling down. And then let's see, there's some other personification. The morning comes to consciousness. Well, the morning doesn't come to consciousness. We come to consciousness in the morning, but he's kind of personifying that in a really,
Yeah.
really interesting way. There's a little bit more of that. Well, let's stick with the first stanza. our section for now. What sticks out to you there?
Well,
Um,
to me, that's, the first part to me is kind of the opening parry of the poem,
mhm,
where they like set the table.
mhm.
Um, so so
It's
the
almost like you're just
interesting thing that I
walking.
found, what's that?
It's almost like he's just walking through the streets in the evening.
Yeah.
He's smelling steaks, tells you that it's 6 o'clock, it's the end of the day, and he's seeing these different things. And then I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
But yeah, and put a pin in one thing. You were saying that you think this is a not a happy poem, and I'm not sure that I agree. I think that it is very grimy and grubby and in your face, and but I think there are some flashes of redemption
Yeah,
in here. But
yeah,
um,
I'm sure.
but
Yeah,
but one, it's like it starts off with that it settles down, and it's just you're kind of like, I found myself, um, as I was reading this, especially in the different sections, that I felt like it was cinematic. Like you get to the end of part one, and you get an iris effect, and
hmm.
then it opens up on another scene.
Scene. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And like you were saying, like the winter settles down, and the interesting. I don't want to get ahead of everything, but the thing that I found the most fascinating, or consistently fascinating, about this poem is how the the point of view, the subject keeps changing.
Yep. Yep.
You know, um, and that it didn't even occur to me until you said it, that there's an implicit subject
Yep.
in the first section that you don't even,
Yep.
that you as the reader don't even really clock. You're just like looking at, like,
Yeah.
you're looking at the evening, the winter evening, you're looking into a tableau,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to, um but the way you just described it, it's kind of as if you're in like, section 4, his
Yeah.
soul stretched out,
Yeah. I mean, we have no pronouns in that first
hmm
part. Then we have one thinks in the second one. Then we have all of a sudden you. Who is you?
yeah,
Who is you? And then in the last one we have his. And then it ends with, or the last part, I. So
I.
it's
And in the
bouncing
middle
off.
there, there's a one can't help but, it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Now,
there's every way of interacting.
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. It's like a 360 view. And then, yeah, and sticking a little bit longer with that first section, um, I think we should talk a little more as we walk through this poem a little bit about my view that it's kind of dark and it's not real happy, and your view that there's some maybe true, but maybe some redeeming qualities. And again,
hmm
just look at the language here: grimy, withered
hmm
leaves, and the
Yeah.
showers beat
Beat.
in.
Yeah.
That's pretty strong. On broken blinds, they're broken, and then a lonely cab horse steams. And then the lighting of the lamps. Maybe that's a little glimmer there at the end, and
Well,
then the
that's
lighting
something
of
I
the lamp.
noticed looking at different versions of this, um, online, and I think I have I couldn't find our actual book, but in some versions of the poem that I saw online, and then the lighting of the lamps is of a piece with the rest of part one, but several of them have, it's like its own paragraph,
Mm. I
right?
don't
So it
know.
resets the scene. It's like, yes, all this grime, and you can hear it, and it's assaultive, it's like, and it's raining, and then they light the lamps
Yeah,
in the rain, and that's beautiful,
yeah, yeah.
you know
It is. Yeah,
and
and
then
there's
iris
a
down,
beauty. There's a beauty too to the withered leaves and to the broken blinds. Absolutely. I don't know
yeah,
if I have the authoritative version. The one I read comes from this edition right here,
uh-huh,
and I wasn't aware that there are multiple versions out there. It doesn't surprise me. Um,
hmm
I think the best case of that is Whitman with Leaves of Grass. He was constantly revising, and
Yeah.
you'll even see that with a lot of contemporary poets. One of the things I've noticed, and this has happened on a couple of these episodes, if a poet, for example, publishes a poem in the New Yorker, and then later it ends up in one of his or her books, very often there's a little tweak and change here and there, and
Yeah.
we do that with songs too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not,
I
yeah.
have.
Oh, absolutely. I've got, there's a song that I play live that I play it different than the record because I
Yeah,
came up with
yeah,
a better
right.
verb,
Yeah,
you know.
I have literally made a mistake singing a song live, and used a homonym or something, but it wasn't the right word. And I said, "Oh, I like that better. That's what it's going to
Yeah.
be from now on." Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move to section two.
Hmm.
I love that line. The morning comes to consciousness. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's a kind of personification, but it's also it feels so real. I see this almost as if he's hungover,
Yeah.
because maybe just because of the faint smells of beer, but that night before he's walking through, I get this image of like a dark London street, and of course Eliot was an American who became an Englishman. Uh,
Hmm.
he uh, he he was probably more English than a lot of naturally born Englishmen. He was not just an Anglophile; he became an Englishman. But I picture him maybe with a bowler hat on or something, walking through these streets of London in the first section, and then the second section he's waking up and he's a little hungover.
Hmm.
Uh, and
You
I
get
mean,
some corroboration of that in part three.
yes, and then we're faint smells of beer, and then we're going for that coffee because we're but then again, it's muddy feet, and it's sawdust-trampled streets, and it's masquerades that time resumes. One thinks, oh, there's one. One thinks of
Yeah.
all the hands that are raising dingy shades. They're not shade, they're dingy shades. So again, it's it's not just a city setting, it's a kind of a grimy, dirty city.
Right. And the way I feel about the point of view is like as if you're holding a magnifying glass in the sun, trying to burn a hole in a piece of paper.
Hmm.
And you've got it too close to the paper and it's diffuse. And this poem is like slowly bringing that magnifying glass backwards and bringing the point of view just tighter and tighter and tighter,
Beautiful.
you know.
Yeah, that's
I
beautiful.
don't know if that stands up, but it goes from the city. It goes from an unidentified,
Yeah,
point of view to kind of the city as a point of view
yeah,
to one, which is kind of the royal we, right? Like everybody.
yeah.
Then you and like
Yeah, it's
it's a
almost in and out of focus a little bit, to use your analogy. It's like, okay,
yeah,
I went too far. Let me come back. Okay, now let me back.
yeah,
Until, yeah.
yeah. Now it's diffuse in the other direction,
Oh, I love this. This is really cool. Yeah, yeah.
and then the you could be the author,
Yes.
or it could be described. I mean, it's just not determined. You
Right.
you
Right.
don't get to know that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's often used in a way that is saying, yeah, it's me, but it's us. It's all of us. We've all had this
yeah,
experience. Yeah.
and to kind of
You
return to what you were talking. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead. Return to what?
What you were talking about earlier about, like you can't just say I'm lonely in a song.
Yeah.
The specificity is ironically what makes it more relatable to more people
Yeah. And you
because
notice you just did what I said. You said you can't say I'm lonely. There's that second person, meaning we.
yeah.
You weren't meaning me, even though it's
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
John, you can't. I can. You can't.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you tossed a blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited. You're hungover, you dozed. There's sordid images, revealing those
Yeah.
thousand sort of which your soul was constituted. I don't, man, that's sordid images of which your soul was constituted. That's not a real happy phrase.
No, it is not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it still feels universal to me.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
You
real.
know, it still feels like we all have to put a lid on some things.
You bet, man.
You
And
know.
then the world comes back. I love that too.
Hmm.
You're kind of dozing off, you're dozing off and waking up and slowly, coming to consciousness, and then the world comes back. And when
Yeah.
all the world came back and the light crept up between the shutters, and then it gets very specific about
Yeah.
description again. These sparrows in the gutters, you can just see those sparrows. Uh, and a wonderful personification. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands.
Right. That,
Yeah,
and that's to me, that's a shaft of light, right?
nice.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't know if that's true. That's just how it's, this whole poem, the word that keeps coming to me is refracted. Everything kind of bounces back onto this section. Like I have all these, you can't really see it, but all these notes that are like,
yeah,
does this refer back to section one?
yeah,
Or
yeah,
like on that, like you had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. Is this the infinitely gentle suffering thing?
uh,
You know, um, but then you know, I see that as you have, like you have the totality of it. Like somebody who's just done mushrooms or something.
uh,
And
not Eliot.
right, not Elliot.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
what about these papers? You curled the papers from your hair. That one
Yeah, I mean, the
really.
the immediate thing in my mind is maybe there was a way to curl your hair as a
Ah,
as a fashion thing,
ah.
and you sleep on that. But if you went to sleep drunk, you didn't do that.
But it could be he's a writer. It could be he has papers he's reading and or writing in bed and the night before, and
Right.
he ends up in the morning with papers strewn
Yeah,
about. It could be that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He may just be clawing this stuff out of his face.
yeah. By the way, I should probably wait until we're finished looking at the poem to say this, but I want to go ahead and say it now. I want to thank you for choosing this poem and choosing Eliot, because my first inclination when you chose Eliot, I don't know if I communicated this to you or not, was to push back and say, no, he's too anthologized, he's too well known, he's too much in the canon.
Hmm.
And part of the point of this podcast is to expose myself and other people to maybe poets who are not quite as well known. I
Uh-huh.
say that, but I've had Elizabeth Bishop and Billy Collins, but
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot. It felt like, oh, let's not do him. But
Yeah.
man, you know what it's like? It's like you pick up the Beatles album and you haven't listened to the Beatles in years for some reason, and you put that album on and remind yourself of how fucking great they were.
Yeah.
And
This
why don't
stuff is
I listen
popular
to
for a reason.
why don't I listen to them anymore? True.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for new music, and I'm listening to Wes Collins and Jamie Harris and people like that because I
Mm-hmm.
want to discover something that's new and fresh. But then you put on that Beatles album and you go, ah. And that was my
Yeah.
experience with Elliot. So I want to thank you for that.
Sometimes you can reinflate that pulp, that you've, you've,
Yeah.
you've pulped a record out, like there's just nothing left but a husk of that record
Yeah.
just because I've
Yeah.
scraped it all out.
So much of classic rock is that way. I have friends who that's all they listen to is classic rock. Yeah. How
Yeah.
many times can you listen to Stairway to Heaven? Okay.
Yeah.
So 4, his soul stretched high. Now we have his. This is the first
Yeah.
his in the entire poem. By the way, it's called Preludes, and I haven't tried to find this in the criticism, so I don't know if there's a stock answer or we just don't know. What is this a prelude to? These are
Mm.
preludes. They're preludes to something. A prelude is something that comes before something else. What are these preludes to?
Yeah.
Any
All
idea?
I mean, the immediate thing to me is a prelude to buttoning up your jacket and getting on with your day.
Okay.
But that's probably a very reductive reading of
Well,
this
I think
poem.
the poem does have a movement even though it doesn't start in the morning, it starts in the evening. It goes from the evening to the next morning, and then
Hmm.
we're clearly kind of moving through the day here. And then all of a sudden, in the end, we have 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. Now we're back to the evening again.
Right.
So it's maybe the first stanza or the first section is a prelude to the second section, is a prelude to the third, etc. It could be just movement through time like this. I don't know.
Yeah.
Fascinating though. This came out. This is one of Eliot's early poems. It came out, I think, in his first book, Proof Rock and Other Observations, 1917. Only 12 poems in that volume, but
Mm.
it really established him right off the bat that this is
Yeah.
this is a brilliant. You cannot ignore this guy. Well, what
Yeah.
jumps out in section 4 to you? What do you want to talk about there?
Um, so what I've written down on here is like, is this soul, his soul, stretched tight across the sky? That is the first, like, I can't square this
Mm,
with anything else in the poem. You
mm.
know, is this someone thinking of someone else? Um, there's nothing that I can put to it that explains it.
I think it's the
Um,
same person throughout. I really do. I think it's
yeah,
one, it's you, it's I, and his is this. It's just another way of. I mean, we've all sometimes it's juvenile. I've written songs many years ago and poems about myself, but I put it in that third person.
oh
He
yeah.
felt this and he did this. I just think that's what, at least from the
Well,
pronoun
yeah. I
point.
mean, it's square. It does square if you think of the magnifying glass analogy. If you're just going up and down,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you go beyond the refraction point or whatever, you know that it and remind me to tell you a story about Anita and T.S. Eliot.
Okay,
Uh,
okay. His soul stretched tight across the skies. I'm not sure what I get from that. It instantly makes me think of that wonderful line. I don't know if it's Wasteland or Proof Rock. I think it's Proof Rock where he says something is something. He's talking about the skies like a patient etherized
Ether eyes
table.
upon a table. Yeah.
For some reason, I think of that, but
It's
I'm
like the
not sure.
least poetic line, like not sentimental. you
Right,
know?
right, right.
I mean, to me, it feels like the soul is hidden, right? It's stretched tight across the sky that
Okay,
fade behind a city block or
okay.
trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. It's like never stops,
Mhm.
right? And to me, this part of the poem doesn't move forward in time. You're still stuck in time. You're thinking
Mm,
about the coming day, and and this soul is there even if you can't see it from all the grime and the withered leaves and the
ah,
stubby fingers and all this ugliness and brutishness and inevitability of the day coming at you like a fire hose. There's a soul there
mhm.
always,
Yeah,
and
and that's
you can grab it right before you put on your clothes in the morning while you're still hungover.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful, Wes. And that sort of tracks with that finally we get to a first person. I am moved. He's
Yeah,
moved by all these images and all this stuff. And the notion, this is so beautiful, the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Ah, life.
yeah,
But
yeah.
infinitely gentle. Um, now, the conclusion again. Let's see what we can do with that. Wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh.
Yeah.
The
It's like,
world's re-
God, never mind.
the world revolve like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots. Man, I that's quite an image.
Yeah. There is zero sentimentality in that line,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And again, it reads like a command. It's like you've come in all this, it's you're practically just nose to nose with I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images, right? You're just like we are, we're, it's like so you cannot have this conversation at a bar,
Mm,
you know,
mm.
and they're and then just it's like almost you're not moving past it, you're moving backwards out of it, like anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and laugh. It's
Yeah,
sort of a laugh of, oh, you know, not much we can do about this. Kind of, yeah, just
yeah, and it's like you've had the city and he and one and you and now I, and then this is almost a command, wipe your hand across your
yeah,
mouth. Although I don't read it that way. I read it as
yeah,
like,
but it is sort of uh, he's telling you to do it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, before I ask you to read this poem for us to take us out, it's is the story about Anita and T.S.
It's a
Oh,
story about how do you know the songwriter Jonathan Brooke?
yeah.
So I had a chance to see Jonathan Brooke, and I was working retail at the time, and so I was going to get to go backstage. And at the time, uh, one of Anita's and my favorite albums was by Jonathan Brooks' duo, The Story. And there was a song on that album called At the Still Point. And the chorus was At the Still Point of Desire. And I thought that was an amazing metaphor because I thought it was I kind of thought of the still point as like a mathematical or a geometrical thing. Like if you throw a ball up into the air, when the ball reaches zero velocity, that would be its still point. And after that, it's decay, right? And so I was thinking the still point of desire would be this is the apotheosis of desire, and after this, it's all a slow rot, you know. And what a sweet way to put that. And Anita was like, no, 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 no. There's a T.S. Eliot line about the still point of desire.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that's what she meant. I was like, well, I'll ask her, you know. So we got to, I got backstage and got her to sign my CD, and I asked her that, and she was like, "Oh yeah, it was totally the T.S. Eliot thing."
Yeah, yeah.
My wife will be so pleased,
But
you know.
but 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 that doesn't comment on whether T.S. Eliot meant something different than the way you interpreted it.
Yeah, I don't remember what poem it's in now at the moment, but
Some of our
it
lis-
was at odds with
some of
my
our
reading.
listeners are now looking that up, and I will be looking it up after we sign off here. But that's great, man. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. Well, before I ask you to read this and to kind of send us off here, is there anything else you want to say about this poem or Eliot?
No, I just really enjoyed it. I mean, I still don't feel particularly qualified, and I'm sure I'm getting some things wrong, but I really just enjoyed it.
You're
Just
worthy. You're worthy.
I mean, that's the way I feel um, about poetry is that there's a potential Rorschachiness to it, to
Yeah.
where you can experience it the way you experience it and then experience it again differently later, that some prose does not afford that. Some books, it's like there is a way to get this,
Yeah.
and you get it or you don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't. And I'm sure that there is a way to take this poem that is proper and I've missed it by some margin. But I really enjoyed my experience with it.
I don't think so. And speaking of being worthy and not being up to the task and everything, I mean, who do I think I am hosting a poetry podcast? You know, we just
And
go for it. Well, listen, Wes, you're a wonderful man, and I have really enjoyed all of our interactions, and thank
oh,
you so much for
likewise.
doing this. Why don't you, if you will, take us out? I'd love to hear this poem in your voice.
All right, let's maybe some start overs, but we'll try it.
All right, it's okay.
Preludes by T.S. Eliot. The winter evening settles down with smell of steaks in passageways. 6 o'clock. The burnout ends of smoky days. And now a gusty shower wraps the grimy scraps of withered leaves around your feet and newspapers from vacant lots. The showers beat on broken blinds and chimney-pots. And at the corner of the street, a lonely cab horse steams and stamps. And then the lighting of the lamps. 2. The morning comes to consciousness of faint, stale smells of beer from the sawdust-trampled street, with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands. With the other masquerades that time resumes, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. 3. You tossed a blanket from the bed. You lay upon your back and waited. You dozed and watched the night revealing the 1,000 sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling. When all the world came back and the light crept up between the shutters and you heard the sparrows in the gutters, you had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. Sitting along the bed's edge where you curled the papers from your hair or clasped the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. 4. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock and short square fingers stuffing pipes and evening newspapers and eyes assured of certain certainties, the conscience of a blackened street impatient to assume the world. I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling, the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh. The worlds revolve like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots.
T.S. Eliot. What a fascinating man. Wes,
Yeah.
thank you again so much for doing this.
It was.
I will definitely put a link in the show notes to your website. I encourage people to go to listen to your wonderful music, and I wish you
Thanks,
all the
man.
best, my friend.
Likewise. I appreciate it, man. I had it was fantastic.
I
had
enjoyed it
such a
too.
good time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, man. See you
Bye-bye.
soon.